I'm thrilled today to interview Dr. Gary Mallon, and I'm going to let him tell you a whole lot more about his career and his passions. But I'm just very grateful. I'm loving looking at you in this beautiful setting. I know it's not where you normally live. Here you are in New York, and you're quite a traveler, and I've enjoyed following you on your many travels. And so I'd like to just start out with your talking about who you are, where you normally are professionally, where you live, and something about your writing, which certainly has been one of the most helpful things on my office shelf for quite a while now. So can I just begin by saying, pick 5 or 6 things that are important about you that people watching would want to know?
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very appreciative, and I've always admired your work too.
Thank you.
I'm Gary Mallon. I am a professor at the Hunter College School of Social Work, which is now called the Silverman School of Social Work in New York City. I have been at Hunter College for 31 years.
Wow.
I teach child welfare practice, and I run a center that we have there that's called the National Center for Child Welfare Excellence. I've ran the National Research Center for Foster Care and Permanency Planning, and the National Research Center for Family-Centered Practice. It changed its name quite a bit for about 13 years. But those ended. They were grant-funded programs a couple of years ago. I'm a former foster parent and an adoptive parent. And the things that I've written about mostly, I guess I'm mostly known for writing about the work in child welfare with gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and questioning young people and their families.
Yes.
I pretty much started working with and looking at young people only, and then I really started to kind of expand that to looking at people who may become foster parents for LGBTQ young people, or people who are parents of LGBTQ young people. And I still write and research and travel the world to talk about that. So I very much, it's been my lifelong passion. I've been a child welfare person for in the field for 47 years. So it's been my life's work and passion. So it's always fun. I've never regretted doing what I do for one day. So it's been a lot of fun.
How did you end up gravitating to your passion? I mean, what is it about your background that brought you to this interest?
Well, when I was in high school, I was part of the Catholic Youth Organization, and we used to have to do these, not have to, but we did these projects where we worked with people in need. And one of the projects we had was to work at St. Dominic's Home for Children, and with kids who were in foster care. Of course, at that time, I didn't understand what that was. I thought they were orphans. You know, this is 1970, like 3 or 4. And I loved it. And I thought, my gosh, people get paid for this? I couldn't believe that. So when I went to get my bachelor's degree at Dominican College, and I wanted to work, I applied for a job at St. Dominic's Home as a childcare worker and got a job there when I was, I forget now, but I think I was 19. And of course, they told me I was too young, and I was the youngest person ever hired, and I shouldn't do that. And of course, I thought I knew everything and rejected that from them. Of course, I knew nothing. But I started working when I was 19, and I worked in a cottage. That's what we called it at that time, for 15 children between the ages of 6 and 13 years old who were in foster care in a congregate care setting. And for the most part, in those days, we slept in like 3 nights a week. A lot of times I worked like double, triple shifts. So I was there for 24, 36 hours alone with 15 kids and a 19-year-old. So like, it was a real eye-opening experience of what it was like to deal with children and their families, because the families would visit. And in those days, child welfare was not as welcoming to families as we are now, I hope. And we kind of initially thought, oh, these families are terrible. They can't take care of these kids. It's horrible. It's terrible. And then when you met the families, you realize, wow, I remember this one woman vividly. She came to visit her son one day, and she was 16 herself. She was a child, and she was hungry. And she said, can I have a sandwich? I was making sandwiches for the kids. And she said, can you make me a sandwich, please? Because I haven't eaten anything all day. And I thought, my God, she's not horrible. She's just a child. Yeah. So that really changed my my way of thinking about families, although we really were not as affirming with families, nor did we do the kind of work that families really needed. We've gotten somewhat better. I'm not going to say we're there yet, but we've gotten somewhat better. So that was
Yeah.
the introduction.
That's really helpful. It's interesting. That's how I got interested in it too, was in high school working in a similar setting. And
Uh,
it's interesting that we backed into it, both of us in our adolescent years.
yeah.
Um, you do travel quite a bit,
Yeah.
and I've loved following that. Is traveling one of your passions that balances the hard work that you do in child welfare?
Well, a lot of times I'm traveling for work too. So yeah, I love to travel. I mean, I've always traveled. I mean, the first trip I ever took, I was 13 years old, and I went to visit my family in Ireland that I had never met by myself. And
Wow.
I since then I think I've continued to travel. I love to travel for myself. In fact, my husband and I are going to Morocco this summer and to Spain
Oh,
and to Scotland, which is a strange group of countries to go to all at the same time, especially Scotland. I'm giving a talk there. But
oh,
I do a lot of I've been doing a lot of international work lately in the Netherlands and in Spain, and in Ireland, and England and Scotland, which I've been really excited about because doing LGBTQ work in those countries, 20 years ago nobody did anything there, and I was doing stuff in New York back in like the early 90s. And sadly, what they're finding now and doing the research that they're doing is basically what I found in the 1990s here in New York. But Europeans are different than Americans in the way that they look at sexuality and in the way they think about things. So it's not as ugly, I think, as what we found in the US in those days. And sadly, getting uglier by the minute in places like
yes,
Texas, Florida. And please keep that in because
yeah,
it's absolutely disgusting what these politicians are doing to transgender kids and LGBTQ kids around the country. It's become the new whipping boy for stuff, and it has nothing to do with LGBTQ kids. It's all conservative, ugly politics. But in any
agree.
case, doing this
Yeah.
stuff in Europe has been really wonderful. And the nicest thing is I get to work with these wonderful European colleagues who just are so generous and wonderful to work. You're all like, 30 years younger than me at this point. But it's really nice to work with these young people and to kind of hear, the way that they look at things. And I had lunch a couple of weeks ago in Spain with this group of gay, lesbian, and transgender kids. And it was just so eye-opening to sit and listen to them. Their experiences are very different than the ones I heard back in the 90s in some ways, and yet in other ways almost exactly the same. So yeah, I've been traveling a lot, and I've been writing a lot with colleagues from other countries too, which I've really enjoyed very much. It's changed my whole trajectory of kind of just, I did a lot of US stuff, and now it's kind of broadened to kind of be more inclusive of mostly European countries, and hopefully at some point we'll do some stuff in Asia. I've done some lecturing in Asia, but not as much work as I would have hoped to. So at some point.
So what are you lecturing on when you go abroad, and you bring your knowledge base with you? What do people want to know from you? What are they asking for?
Well, the sad thing is it's very basic information. Like for instance, in October, I'm speaking at this child protection conference in Cork in Ireland. And it's a major conference that they've run every year for like 19 years, and they have never had a workshop or a speaker about LGBTQ issues. And
Wow.
so they invited me to come and be the keynote speaker, which I'm very honored to do, and to do a workshop for them. And the reason they did that is because last summer I volunteered to do a lecture for free in Galway, and I did it on purpose, hoping I could get a little niche into Ireland, and kind of do some work there because my family is from Ireland and I'm Irish myself. So it's nice to be able to do it in that country. And they invited me to do this keynote, which is wonderful, and it's on basic issues on care practice with LGBTQ children, youth, and families.
Wow.
The basic thing about definitions and what to do, what not to do, what's unique, what's not unique. What can people do to competently practice with these children and families? And it's shocking to me that people still are like they just don't know. I don't mind doing it. It's just that they just don't know. They don't know the language. They don't know what to say. So you kind of give them knowledge and information, and I always try to give them some humor as well because I think that's really important
Yeah.
because they kind of freeze when they think, oh my gosh, I don't know this stuff, and maybe I'm going to look stupid, or maybe somebody will make fun of me that I don't know this. So I try to use some humor to loosen them up and lighten them up about it. Sometimes I talk about adoption issues, which I love.
Uh-huh.
Not necessarily about LGBTQ adoption, but adoption issues as a adoptive parent and somebody who's been immersed in that world as well. Joyce McGuire Pavo and I taught a class many years ago in New
Uh-huh.
York, and then I replicated it in Louisiana and taught it in Louisiana for like 12 years, and
Wow.
did it in Massachusetts for a couple of years. And the sad thing is now they have one online that's free, so everybody uses that one, and they no longer have us teach a class in person. Which what the online one's wonderful, and the people who teach it are great, but I don't think it's the same as when you're teaching it in person.
No.
And because it's free, nobody wants to, of course, pay anybody anymore to teach it. So
Right.
it's kind of sad. I really miss it because we did it on permanency and adoption, because in some of the states it was like foster care to adoption was really more about permanency than kind of traditional adoption. But we changed it up a few times, and so sometimes I do that, but I think primarily my things that I talk about are working with LGBTQ children, youth, and families.
Okay. And do you get a lot of pushback?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, in the early days, a very cute little boy here who's smiling at me. There's sometimes I do, and in the early days, a lot more than pushback. I mean, I used to get, like little handwritten notes sometimes that people would give me and say, don't read this until you go home. And I would read it, and it would say things like, you think that you're very funny, but you're not. You're going to hell, because what you're talking about is evil and sinful. And I would think, oh my God, would I have gotten that if I was talking about like hyperactivity? I don't think so. But
No.
it was kind of shocking. And I don't get that so much anymore. And I asked my colleagues in Europe if they get that, and they said no, they haven't. But so I
Okay.
guess things are a little bit better. But yeah, it was terrible in the beginning. And in the beginning, people used to say, we don't have any kids like that. Like, why are you even talking about this stuff? I remember one woman specifically saying to me, we have 1,200 kids in our program who are teenagers, and some of them are as bad as hell, but none of them are gay. And I thought, oh, wow.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
said to her, I bet you're wrong. I bet a lot of them are gay, and you just don't know it. And
Yeah.
she was sure that she had no gay kids. And
Wow.
another time, I remember meeting this little nun from a Catholic agency, and she said to me, I asked her, I said, sister, do you think you've ever had any young women who were lesbians in your program? And I loved her answer. She just said, no, dear, we've never had any young lesbians, but some of them have become lesbians when they left, and then they come back and tell us.
Ah,
I said, well, they probably were lesbians when they were there, sister, but they just didn't feel comfortable talking about it. But it's really nice that they want you to know who they were when they were adults. So she laughed and smiled, and I just remember that just stuck with me, that way of describing it. So
besides the traveling, the lecturing, and the teaching, and I want to get back to the teaching briefly, but what else do you do to kind of keep yourself in balance? Because the work you're doing is profoundly difficult.
oh yeah. Well, I've had a lifelong struggle, as many of us do, with finding the balance. I think because I love what I'm doing and I'm so passionate about it, and I've learned that you can wear yourself out, and you need to take breaks, and you need to go away. And that's part of the traveling too, is getting away from New York and
Right.
getting away from Hunter College. Sometimes just helps me to separate a little bit, so that I feel I'm very far away and I can take a break. But gosh, there've been times when it's like I've realized like I'm in a funk, or I'm exhausted. I mean, mostly exhausted, and some of the exhaustion I think manifests as it's depression that
Yes.
manifests as exhaustion, and it takes me a minute to realize what's going on, and then I sometimes go to therapy. Sometimes I talk to my friends and say, look, I'm, and they'll say, but why don't you take some time off, or why are you working so hard? And partially, I felt like initially I was working so hard because there was so much to do. I've gotten a little bit better. I have a husband who reminds me to like stop. Like, for instance, yesterday I worked with my IT guy to put away messages on my email, which I never do, because this year when we go away, I don't want to answer my email, and I don't want to be interrupted. And I've been telling my staff, look, please don't give me 5 weeks. I'm away for 5 weeks. I know that's a long time, but you know what? I don't want to answer email. I don't want to hear things. Nothing's life or death. I mean, when I worked in child welfare, that was life or death. Some of the things I do now is not life or death. It's it's training or it's a an article somebody's writing or teaching class, they can wait for a while. So I've been trying to do that. I have to be honest, Sharon, I'm not always really successful with it. And I'm kind of a little bit nervous because a couple of years from now I will retire, and it's like, okay, I need to figure out some other things that I want to do because you invest so much time and energy into the work, because not just because it's important, but because you really love it too.
Yeah,
As
boy,
I
I
know
can
you
sure
have,
relate. Yeah.
that you just, it becomes so integral to your life. And, it's very hard. And my husband is a computer guy, so he's not at all a social worker. And, he'll sometimes say things to me and I'll say, you just don't understand. Like, you just can't leave people hanging out there, when something's going on. I mean, I was sick a couple of weeks ago and I pretty much stayed home, but I had to go to two things. He's like, I don't know why you have to go to that. I don't know why you can't tell somebody that. I was like, I have a responsibility. I have to go. I'm not feeling good. I'll be quiet. I'll try to come home right afterwards, but I just feel like I need to go. And, he's right. I probably could have stayed home, but there's part of me that is compelled to do those things. So, I keep striving for the balance. Like maybe one day I'll get it.
Well, you're talking about someday retiring. I don't think social workers ever retire, but
No, not really.
when you do retire, and people are talking about you down the road, what would you like them to say about you? I mean, do you have something you'd like to have in a eulogy someday?
Yeah, I guess so. I think there's three big things that I've done in my life that I'm extremely proud of. The first one is, I ran this program called Grace House in East Harlem for 7 years when I was very young. I was 22 years old. I stayed there for 7 years, and it made a difference in the lives of these young people who were from these neighborhoods, and I still see them, and I live in East Harlem still. Uh,
Oh,
they're adults now by many years, but I'm so proud of that. And then the other thing I did was I ran Green Chimneys Children's Services. This program was one of the first programs in the country for LGBTQ young people, and I was there for 19 years, and that was such a life-changing program for myself and for the young people. And then running the National Resource Center was my opportunity to go out around the country and kind of talk about child welfare issues in a way that I only dreamed of when I was like a student. And
yeah.
and it was all very mainstream. It was during the Bush administration. They kept telling me, you're not allowed to talk about gay stuff, Gary. Don't talk about gay stuff. And of course I did. But I had to be really careful about it. And but it was wonderful, those three things. But I think in the end, what I would really like most is for people to remember that I was a good social worker, and that I tried to make a difference in the lives of the young people and the families that I worked with, particularly gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender kids.
Oh.
I would hope that they would say that. I mean, there's a lot of people doing that now who weren't doing it before, and I've you kind of have to give up like that. People invite you to everything, and you're always the expert. I'm okay with not always being the expert anymore. It used to hurt my feelings in the beginning. Now I'm like, it's okay. There's a lot of other people out there. Let them do it, and I'm very happy to do that. But I would like, in the end, for people to remember that what I did really changed people's lives.
It did. I will vouch for that. Yes.
Thank you.
Um, you've been a professor for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm consulting with young students, I mean, young graduates who are starting private practice and are hungry for mentors, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. That's kind of my retirement joy. And what I'm aware of is how different the students are today than they were when I was managing programs and newly graduate students came in and I would hire them. And what a difference. I mean, I've worked in the field now. I worked in the field over 60 years. And so the changes were incredible over those years. You must really see a difference. And I'm wondering if
Yes.
you could reflect a little bit about who's coming to graduate school. What are they like? What's it like teaching over these years? What changes have you noticed?
Well, Hunter College is a private, a public university. So, like, first of all, 97% of our graduates stay in New York City. 67% of our students are young people of color. So we it's a very different maybe student population than a place like Columbia or NYU or Fordham.
Mhm.
I have been for the last couple of years only teaching undergraduates in the BSW program, and I love them. They they are, first of all, they don't have all that political correctness that the graduate students have, because they're kind of green and they really are interested in listening, and they're fun. And I got really sick of the graduate students because like every other word would be like, I'm offended by that, or I don't think that you're giving me agency to speak about these issues. And I would think, what the hell are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
but the funny thing is, Sharon, is that I finished my last class on Monday and they gave me a card and they gave me a box of chocolates, which I gave to my husband because they're bananas, chocolate covered bananas, which I don't like, but he loves them. So they gave me this card, but I'm reading the card and here's what some of them are saying. Yo, bro, thanks for the great class. Hey, dude, it was a great class. And I thought to myself, who would call their professor bro and dude? You know,
Yeah.
there's something about it that I started laughing when I read that. And I told my secretary this morning, I said, can you imagine like calling your professor dude or bro? You know,
Right.
and I'm very open with them about like, I'm 66 years old, I'm like their grandfather.
Uh-huh.
But, it's just very cute that they're like kind of using this way of speaking. And I try to socialize them to like, as a professional, what do you do? And sometimes I'll say to them, like, you wouldn't wear that outfit to work, right? And they're like, well, why not? And I'm like, because you don't look professional. You have like holes in your pants, and they're like, really? Like, should I wear something else? Yeah, like a professional looking outfit,
Yeah.
and I try to give them like really concrete kind of advice because they clearly don't know.
Yeah.
Um, even and so many of them have like multiple piercings and all kinds of stuff going on. I'll say to them, you're going on a job interview and you're going through like a very conservative agency. They're going to take one look at you. They're not going to hire you. Like you might be the most competent professional, but you have to think about where you work. And maybe you don't want to work there. Maybe you want to work in a place where you can have 12 piercings in your nose. But I think, you have to think about these things. I found the bachelor students, I love them. I mean, the class that I had them for a whole year. It was child welfare practice. I brought real people in. I brought in transgender people to talk to them about being transgender. I brought in former students. Oh, I have a really close friend who's doing these podcasts, and one of the podcasts was Maris Bletchner, and
Yes.
I
I
love
love
Maris.
Maris.
Really good
Yeah.
friends. And some of them were like, I need to interview somebody. And I said, watch Maris's podcast. And then here's Maris's number. You can call her up and talk to her afterwards,
Mhm.
because I wanted them to see some real people and then to talk about it. So
Yeah.
that was the assignment, is interview a real person who either grew up in the system or worked in the system and, kind of do an analysis on what you learned from meeting with them. So, but they were great. I think the undergraduates are different. The graduates they're totally into this oppression and social justice, and they feel oppressed on everybody's behalf, and everybody's microaggressing them, and it's like, oh my god, where did all this language come from? And it's not that it's bad, it's just like I keep saying to them, if you tell your boss that you're microaggressing me, you're not going to have a job for a long time.
Right.
You got to understand that like there are things that you can use theoretically, but also what's the practice that you're going to do, and primarily you've got to be professional about what you're doing and what does a professional look like. So I think that's the biggest difference, Sharon, that I've seen in many of them. I taught at Columbia for 3 years too before coming back to Hunter, and there was no real difference. I mean, they were paying $85,000 a year to go there, but I mean, there was no real difference. They were pretty much the same students. So.
Why do I associate you with New Orleans and Louisiana?
Oh, well, because first of all, like Tennessee Williams, I always say New Orleans is my spiritual home. It's the one place in the world that I feel most connected. I have a friend who says, she's so funny. She says, living in New Orleans is like having a bad boyfriend and you should break up, but the sex is just so good. And that's New Orleans. It's like,
Okay.
it's a mess. It's like, it's it's like a third world country. But again, it's so beautiful. And I taught there for many years. Their DCFS staff, and I loved them. They were not the most skilled staff, but they worked hard. And then this past year, I had a great opportunity. My friend Marquita Garner Walters was the commissioner there, and I called her up one day and said, "Look, Marquita, I got more time on my hands. do you need me to do anything? She's like, oh my God, please come and help us. Because they assigned me to work in East Baton Rouge, and I sat in and gave consultation on family team conferences for like 9 months. And
Wow.
I'll tell you, Sharon, it was with line workers and supervisors, and I loved doing it, but it was so traumatizing because I think my clinical muscle was a little bit out of shape because I hadn't heard that kind of horrible stuff in so long. I mean, people living in garden sheds and in abandoned housing, and everybody had a drug problem, everybody had sexual abuse, everybody had domestic violence. I mean, it was so overwhelming. I thought, no wonder why these poor workers need help. And I loved doing it. It was a wonderful experience. I got better over time. I got less traumatized over time. But you also realize that these young colleagues and supervisors are listening to and addressing issues that are horrifically traumatizing. And it reminded me of my initial experience in working in child welfare when I used to come home and I would tell people about what happened, and people were very excited at first, and then they'd start saying, please don't tell me anymore because it's just too horrible to listen to. And the same thing happened. I would tell people a little bit, with confidentiality in mind, but a little bit about what I experienced. And then initially they were like, oh, wow, that's terrible. And then it was like, please don't tell me anything, Gary, because it's just too traumatizing to listen to. And I can imagine what it's like for somebody to live that. Imagine what it's like for the workers to do that every single day and to do that. It was it, and what I reflected back to the administration who hired me, I kept saying to them, you guys have no idea what these people are dealing with. I mean, it's horrific, some of the stuff they're listening to on a daily basis. And they said, yeah, but they keep doing the same treatment plan. I'm like, yeah, because every single person needs the same thing. And then the resources were so limited. It's like everybody needs drug treatment, everybody needs, testing, and those services in some places just didn't really exist, or the waiting list was like 3 months long or 6 months long.
Oh.
Parenting classes online. I'm like, parenting classes online? How do you do that? I mean, during COVID, they had to, but this was after COVID. So and that's why. So I did all this stuff in Louisiana. I'll probably do more at some point, even though my friend who was the commissioner had to step down because 2 children died on her watch. And the governor was like, okay, it's, time for change. And that's, we know that story.
Yes.
I tried to support her and said, and she's a wonderful woman and is deeply committed to what she did. But, again, that's politics. It's like, if it looks bad for the elected official, then the person who's in charge needs to step aside. And they don't ever ask you to do that, but they want you to do that. So I probably will do more. I mean, I have a home in New Orleans, so I'll be going down there like next Wednesday. But I that will be just to kind of enjoy my house and relax a little bit. But yeah, I love Louisiana. It's such a backward kind of place in so many ways, but in the same sense, it's just a wonderful place to kind of learn about people and the culture of New Orleans especially, but Louisiana is very different than New York City, where I've spent most of my life.
Well, I certainly remember some incredible experiences lecturing in Louisiana.
Oh yeah, and Mississippi and Alabama.
Yeah, quite amazing. Considering that the folks watching this, well, they could be prospective adoptive parents or adoptive parents in crisis, but a lot of them are going to be professionals. And you've had so much wonderful experience. If you wanted to give them your top, remember this, do this, this is important from Gary Mallon to you, what do you want them to come away with from this interview?
Let me talk about prospective parents first, or foster parents or adoptive parents. I think, first of all, I think it's a phenomenal commitment that somebody decides they want to do that. And it's not easy. And there are times when you think, I don't know why I ever did this. And this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And what I would say to those people, because I've had those experiences, is hang in there. Please don't quit. It gets better. Sometimes the only thing that works is the fact that you've hung in there and it gets better. And it's so hard because I remember from my own children, there were times when it was like, oh my God, I thought I was an expert. And like, I'm deep into not doing this the right way. And the people who told me like, oh, my daughter is perfect and she does great were horrible, because my children were not perfect and great. They were exhausting and had a lot of stuff going on. And the people who said, don't worry, it gets better. Hang in there. Just keep hanging in there. It'll get better. We're right. It does get better. And I think that people need to hear that. Like, hang in there. It gets better. And then from workers, you know, you got to really like people to do this work. You know, if you don't like people, go work at Target. You know, do something else, because you've got to really, really be able to, I would say, even love people, not just like them, to do the work that we do, because, and to believe that people can change over time, and children and teenagers can change over time. That, you know what, I think the people who are the best at this are, and I hate to say this because it sounds kind of hokey and religious, but it's kind of like people who are on a mission, who believe that what they're doing is like more of a calling, are the people who do this best. I think if you ask somebody like Maris, she would say that too. And, you know, it's like they're deeply committed, and even though there are times when you're frustrated and you feel like you're not making a difference, I'd say most of the time you feel like this is worthwhile, and I'm so happy that I've done this, because I think that it's not only made a change in the life of people that I've worked with, but it's made a change in my life too. So I think for those professionals, you have to love people, and you have to, you know, understand that there's a deep commitment that we're asking you to do. If it comes naturally, all the better. If you have to work at it, some people do have to work at it, you know, and that can be fine too. But I think there's some people who shouldn't do it. You know, they come for a little while and then they leave. You know, they're like, oh, I worked in child welfare. It was just too hard. It's like, okay, well, that's good that you left, because you're not one of the people who are going to stick this out for 47 years or 60 something years. You know, you're in it for a year or two. And with students, I always say that I don't want you to do this for 1 year. I want you to do this with the idea that maybe I'll do this through my whole career. Maybe you won't. But, you know, you've got to stick in there for the long haul. I love people who would say to me after 2 years, like, oh, I think I'm done. Like, you know, everything I set out to do, I'm done. I'm like, hey, really? After 2 years? Come on. You know, so I think it's a lifetime, long-term commitment that many of us have made. And that's, I think, has made the difference.
Amen. Oh,
yep.
Gary, what a joy. What a joy to listen to you. Really. Thank you. You've given us so much wisdom, and I know you're going to continue to do that, and to get to know you a little bit better face to face like this has been a real privilege. And I hope that your vacation is everything you want it to be. Enjoy it.
Yeah.